Hello, my name is Aidan Rupert, alongside me, Rob Murray, and welcome to episode 6 of the WCHC Sports Podcast, where we discuss the latest news and updates from around the sports world. If you're looking to keep up with the hottest stories in sports, then be sure to like and subscribe to our WCHC Sports 88.1 FM YouTube page, where we will be uploading the video podcast every week. Today, Rob and I will be discussing the shocking demise of the Milwaukee Bucks, a thrilling weekend of Game 7s in the NHL Stanley Cup, and top teams emerging and spiraling in the shortened MLB season. But before we get into things, the world wants to know, Rob, how have you managed to balance watching sports and getting all of your work done during this first week of classes?
Well, Aidan, I appreciate your interest in my day-to-day activities, but while week one of online class wasn't that overwhelming, I know for a fact it won't get any easier balancing academics and my love for sports, especially with the start of the NFL season right around the corner. Eventually I just have to pick and choose a handful of games I want to watch here and there, which is a process I'm certainly not looking forward to. However, the start of this new semester will not stop us from getting into what I feel has been the best cumulative week of sports since the MLB, NBA, and NHL restarted back in late July. You had Game 7s all around, shocking upsets, stellar performances. You really couldn't ask for much more.
Yeah, I agree with you, Rob. And I mean, hey, if you can have Zoom open on one tab and watch ESPN open in another, more power to you, right? So certainly both a blessing and a curse, as you mentioned, this past week truly was thrilling all around. Before we get into our discussion on the NBA, Rob and I would like to shout out two former Crusaders who have gotten their start in the professional sports world, Lauren Manis and Neil Robinson. Manis, who was drafted by the WNBA's Las Vegas Aces following an illustrious career at Holy Cross, recently signed with Kangaroos Basket Mechelen in Belgium. Robinson, the leading scorer for Holy Cross men's hockey a year ago, signed last week with the Worcester Railers Hockey Club, the ECHL affiliate of the New York Islanders. Congratulations to Lauren and Neil, and we wish them the best of luck moving forward. So, Rob, elephant in the room, so to speak. In the NBA, the Milwaukee Bucks, who dominated all regular season, find themselves in what is now a 3-1 hole in the second round of the playoffs. And we talked last week about how if anyone was perhaps built to upset the top-seeded Bucks, it was perhaps the Miami Heat. But I was just saying that because I felt like I had to give them some credit. I didn't think we'd end up where we were, which was Miami with a 3-0 lead until Chris Middleton's heroics in overtime eventually led the Giannis Antetokounmpo-less Bucks back in a thrilling win. But I want to get your thoughts just on watching this series so far, as Miami's been led by the play of Jimmy Butler, Goran Dragic, and several key contributors, and they really have themselves in great position to shock the world here.
They really do, Aidan. It's been an unprecedented run from the Heat, and as a Bulls fan, I always love to see Jimmy Butler putting up great performances, especially in the postseason, as that was something he didn't really get the opportunity to do that often, as he had to guard LeBron James in those Bulls-Cavs series throughout the years, and I'm sure that was not a fun endeavor for him. But Butler, Dragic, we have Bam Adebayo, who has really blossomed into a star in this year of the league. But all around, they've done a fantastic job containing Giannis and limiting him in terms of what he can do with the ball and how he can involve his teammates. And it's interesting to see how the Bucks responded to Giannis's injury, late in that game 4. They seemed to turn it around completely. Their shooting was better across the board, and I feel like I owe somewhat of an apology to Chris Middleton for making him my fumble of the week a few episodes ago. He was fantastic down the stretch and hit some big shots right in defenders' faces. So while I do think it was a good moral victory for the Bucks, hopefully Giannis is ready and recovered for Game 5. I do think their time is numbered. Sorry to interrupt you there, but I could see them maybe winning one more game, but with Giannis hurt and playing limited minutes for this team, I think the magic will eventually run out, and and Butler and, Nunn, Dragic, Adebayo, Crowder, the depth will just be too much for Milwaukee. And I think we'll see the Miami Heat in the Eastern Conference Finals, which I never would have thought at the beginning of the bubble.
Nor would I have, Rob. And not only would the Bucks have to overcome Giannis's injury, which Coach Mike Budenholzer described as quite serious post-game, actually after Game 3 when he initially injured it, but they would actually have to come back from a deficit that no NBA team has ever come back from, and that's 0-3. Across most American sports, we have seen 0-3 deficit series wins, but not in the NBA. So definitely it is unlikely. And it's just watching, Game 2 had the crazy ending with the crazy calls, and it easily could have ended up 1-1 Bucks Heat. But in the end, Miami got the last laugh. And then Game 3 is really when they had their most impressive showing, as in the fourth quarter, they outscored the Milwaukee Bucks. I believe it was 40-19 for the greatest point differential in the fourth quarter in NBA playoff history. So really, the rails came off for the Milwaukee Bucks, and being down 3-1, they're obviously showing grit without their leader right now, but they have only themselves to blame.
Absolutely. And realistically, Aidan, we could be talking about this series being over already if it wasn't for another controversial call at the end of this Game 4. I'm not sure if you saw, but Jimmy Butler going to the rim, Heat down by 2, about a minute to go. He's fouled and loses the ball, goes off him out of bounds. The call is Heat ball. The refs go back, switch the call as the ball went off him, but in the rule book, they can't change, the no call to a foul. So Heat lose possession. The game goes to overtime. Chris Middleton steps up with a few big shots, and the Bucks stay alive for one more game.
Exactly, Robin. I know exactly the play you are referring to. And if you had your volume up on your TV, you know that Jeff Van Gundy was irate with the NBA rulebook at that point in time, given that, the officials' primary focus is, frankly, on getting the call right. So what good does it do anyone if they can't retrospectively adjust the call in accordance with what actually happened? So I think it's definitely something the league will look at moving forward. But credit to Jimmy Butler. He turned to the official and gave him like one of this, but he wasn't yelling. He wasn't screaming. He understands his role as a leader. He knows he couldn't afford to get a technical foul in that situation. So I really liked the demeanor from Jimmy Butler, and I think that he's going to be key for the team in the next 1 to 3 games. But moving on to the other side of the bracket out east, and this is one, frankly, I do not want to talk about whatsoever, but it is the Toronto-Boston series, which is currently tied 2 games apiece after Toronto rallied and won the last 2 games. Particularly in Game 3, Boston was half a second within, taking a commanding 3-0 lead over the defending champions, and OG Anunoby hit a shot from the left corner, again, with half a second left, off a brilliant feed from Kyle Lowry on the opposite sideline. So as a Celtics fan, and frankly, as an NBA fan, I don't think any shot has quite stabbed me in the heart to that extent since maybe Ray Allen's shot as I was cheering for the Spurs in the 2013 finals. So really, it was just something else. And then really a pretty weak showing across the board for Boston in Game 4.
Yeah, and I think, when we look back at this series, when it's all said and done, no matter how it ends, we'll certainly see Anunoby's 3 as almost the turning point. You had the Celtics with an opportunity to go up 3-0, a start I certainly didn't expect. I figured at the start of the series, the Raptors could win in 6-7 games. I'd even give the Celtics a chance in 7. But, with the Raptors having all the momentum now, you can trace it back to Anunoby and his big shot. Pascal Siakam and Kyle Lowry struggled the first 2 games offensively. They've kind of rounded it in their own. You mentioned Lowry's fantastic pass over, a 7'5", 7'6" Tacko fall to set up that winning shot. And the defense has kind of come around under Nick Nurse in limiting the scoring abilities of Jason Tatum. As hard as that may seem, they figured out a way to even up the series and really level the playing field going forward.
Yeah, that's a great call, Rob. And speaking to that Toronto defense and its effectiveness, Nick Nurse has actually switched Toronto's defensive look into a box and one defense, mainly to shut down Tatum. And basically what that's doing for the team is they're gambling because they know Boston's gone ice cold from the perimeter. So they're gambling on their players such as Jaylen Brown and even Kemba Walker not really hurting them from three. And as we saw in game 4 from Jaylen Brown, he simply could not buy an outside look until there were, a few minutes left in the fourth quarter. So I think Jaylen Brown is the key for them in having a bounce back game. But more importantly, just Boston finding a way to crack that box and one defense. And if anyone can do it, I know it's the coaching of Brad Stevens, as the Celtics run more zone than perhaps any other team in the league. So they're accustomed to playing against each other in practice. But really, I think it's going to be really interesting. I think that the winner of Game 5 is going to take the series. I don't even think it's going to go 7. It's just that Toronto has that much momentum right now, and if they win this next one, I don't think they're looking back.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, Game 5s usually end up being the most pivotal game in a series, and like you said, with all the momentum that Toronto has, I can certainly see them finishing out in short order like they did against the Milwaukee Bucks last year in the conference finals. They looked down and out and tore off 4 straight behind Kawhi to get to the NBA Finals. And before we move on to the Rockets Lakers series, I wanted to touch upon your commentary on Jaylen Brown kind of being the guy that needs to step up. And while I certainly agree with that, I think Kemba Walker also needs to be a little bit more selfish, with Jason Tatum kind of being limited by this box and one defense that Nick Nurse has. Kemba himself said, I think it was after Game 4, that his performance was unacceptable. He needs to be more confident shooting the ball, as a leader on that team. And I don't disagree with him. He's a dynamic scorer. He's a playmaker. He had that phenomenal pass inside at the end of Game 3 that would have been the winner
To Tice.
in that contest to Tice. That's right. So I think, while Tatum is critical to that offense and Brown, needs to step up too, I think Kemba Walker is just important as any of those guys.
Of course, and from an unbiased fan's perspective, go Celtics. So moving on to the Rockets-Lakers series, Rob, this is one of the reasons that we wanted to record tonight, just to see how the Lakers would bounce back in Game 2, following a very weak showing in Game 1 against against the Houston Rockets. But basically, again, you mentioned you were listening to that telecast between Heat and Bucks earlier today, and Mark Jackson on the call, he called the Houston Rockets the most improved defense in the history of the NBA, presumably referring to improvement within the course of one regular season. And frankly, I have to agree with him in a lot of ways, as Houston currently boasts the best defensive rating in the playoffs. And it's so interesting. Although they did lose the game today against the Lakers, that series tied 1-1 now. It is so interesting for a team long known for their run-and-gun style under coach Mike D'Antoni, just their offensive powerhouse of a team. Now they're starting to shut down teams, and frankly, I don't think the Lakers quite have cracked it yet. They looked more at Anthony Davis today, which is the key, after he had a very weak showing against PJ Tucker in Game 1. But really, it's the defense that's been leading the way for the Houston Rockets. And I think it's Russell Westbrook. It falls upon him to really come into his own offensively. But back to the defense, he has the highest defensive rating among all players in the NBA playoffs this year. So I've been impressed with them. I thought that they really could have done themselves a favor going up 2-0, and they had the game within reach halfway through the fourth. But what are your thoughts on Lakers Rockets?
Yeah, I agree. I think the Rockets were in a fantastic position to really, put the chokehold on the series. We could have been looking at today one number 1 seed getting swept out of the second round and another going down 2-0.
Yeah.
But we saw the exact opposite. The Lakers played a good game. All credit to them. But, I want to touch back on your point about the Rockets defense and how much they've improved. Funny, Aidan, I remember it had to be 1 or 2 short seasons ago that while James Harden was in the middle of an MVP race with the likes of Steph Curry and Kevin Durant, he was being largely discredited and clowned to an extent for his lack of defense and defensive presence on the floor. Many people thought of him as a very one-dimensional player who could just shoot threes and draw fouls. But I think this series, and especially the series beforehand against the Oklahoma City Thunder, where he made a fantastic defensive play on Lou Dort in the waning moments of Game 7, have shown that Harden's reinvented himself as a basketball player entirely. He's much more energetic on defense. He's willing to put his body on the line. And I think he's honestly learned a little bit from his friend Russell Westbrook in terms of just matching that intensity night in and night out during the playoffs. And I think it's given the Rockets a much better chance in this series than people originally thought. I figured it would be, the Lakers in 5, maybe 6, and that could still be true. But I think a lot of people were surprised how competitive these first 2 games were. And I hope they are, going into the future. I think it'd be a great series seeing all these stars come together and give us a good show.
Yeah, it's your point on James Harden taking more accountability as a defender. He's also really taken more accountability as a leader for that group. And I loved his comments post-game after Game 1, their victory against the Lakers. He said, I don't know why people keep saying we're small. I don't care if you're 7 feet. If you don't have heart, it doesn't matter. And I think that really, really reigns true for this Houston Rockets team. Okay, on the one hand, people are saying that you're small because your tallest starter is the 6'7" Robert Covington, and you're running a 6'6" center in PJ Tucker. But to his point on really bringing the heart and the energy, that's what I'm seeing from the Houston Rockets right now. And Draymond Green had an interesting point himself. He was on Inside the NBA on TNT, and he said that centers should be rooting for the Los Angeles Lakers to win at all costs, because I think his point is that the NBA big man will suddenly become severely devalued if a 6'6" center in PJ Tucker manages to overcome the likes of JaVale McGee, Dwight Howard, and especially Anthony Davis, who the Lakers have increasingly been slotting in at the 5. So I think definitely, yeah, if I'm any big around the NBA hoping to cash in on a big contract this offseason, I'm definitely rooting for the Lakers to show that bully ball can still reign supreme. But that said, I do love what the Rockets are doing, and I wish them nothing but the best going against the Lakers.
Yeah, you said it. I mean, and I even think the idea of small ball and running a smaller lineup to space the floor and shoot threes has already been largely implemented in the NBA. And it's ironic that Draymond Green, alludes to centers rooting for the Lakers, because I think his Golden State Warrior team, that dynasty, was in large part the start of small ball when they ran out, Kevin Durant. Granted, he is almost 7 feet. He's an anomaly, but, trotting him out as their tallest player in most of their games, they've, revolutionized the way the game of basketball is played and how offenses approach each time down the floor. But, there are some centers I still believe that will not be obsolete, even if the Rockets do win the series and continue to push the narrative of small ball working and it being kind of this new wave of basketball. Nikola Jokic and his Nuggets won a classic low-scoring Game 7 against the Utah Jazz, barely escaping after Mike Conley missed an in-and-out three-pointer at the buzzer after a utterly wild sequence, probably the craziest I've seen in my lifetime watching basketball.
You see Gobert stepped out on that possession?
I did see that. And, that certainly would have been helpful. But, losing the ball, if you're the Jazz, and then seeing the other team run down the floor and blow a wide open layup, and then your team missing an open 3 with a second left to move on to the next round has got to be the biggest, roller coaster of emotions I can imagine. And the Nuggets, I thought, would be dead tired after this series and really struggle against the Clippers. And they did in Game 1. They looked gassed, midway through the second quarter. They got blown out. Kawhi had a huge game. But they bounced back in a convincing way in Game 2. And I'd like to get your thoughts on, how they performed in the face of such adversity.
It was funny you mentioned sort of coming out gassed Game 1. Basically, the story was they played Game 7 last Tuesday, and post-game, Jamal Murray is told by Scott Van Pelt of ESPN that the series with the Clippers would begin Thursday. And Jamal says to Scott, dang, we play Thursday? Scott's like, yeah, you do. He's like, oh, shoot, that's unfortunate. So it was very funny, and sort of it was an indicator of what we might see from the Nuggets in that game one, as the Clippers simply took them wire to wire. I didn't watch more than a few minutes. And frankly, I didn't watch game two because I thought it would be more of the same. I only turned the game on with about 6 minutes left in the fourth quarter. Of course, I was also upset from Celtics Raptors just a couple of hours prior. But yeah, it was definitely impressive stuff as both Jokic and Murray came up big for the Denver Nuggets. And that series is tied 1-1. And I look at the series and think, okay, I don't think the Nuggets have much of a shot at beating the Clippers in a 7-game series. But then I look at the Nuggets and I can't convince myself they can't win game three. And suddenly you're up 2-1. Obviously, you're well positioned to make some noise and potentially upset the Los Angeles Clippers team that most believe could reach the NBA Finals. And it's also worth monitoring Nikola Jokic's health. He's currently questionable for game three with a wrist injury. I'm not quite sure what play he was potentially injured on, but Murray had a rough start, but we saw what we keep seeing from him, and that's that he just gets it going towards the end of games and eventually put himself a fairly effective or efficient outing in the end. So I think the Clippers have the bodies to throw at a Jamal Murray and shut him down between Pat Bev, Kawhi Leonard, and Paul George. But if he somehow eludes them, like we saw from last game, and Kawhi obviously struggled himself on offense, of course the Nuggets could win game three. And then you're looking at, oh boy, what's going on here? Clippers suddenly have their season flashing before their eyes. So,
Yeah, it's a whole new ball game once you get to 2 wins in a series. You're really making it a contest. But, you know, I would have put my money on the Clippers at the start of the playoffs to win the whole thing. And I'm going to continue with that. Although I think we have seen some chinks in the armor with the Clippers over these past two series. I think Kawhi has been his usual dominant self, although he did struggle in the fourth quarter of game two. Paul George has really been the story for the Clippers and his ability to rise to the challenge. I think he looked great in game one and really showed that that team needs him if they want to go far in the playoffs. But I think with the Clippers, it's just all about consistency and putting the same level of effort and efficiency in night in and night out, because some nights they're, I think, undoubtedly the best team in the NBA. And other nights they look like a team that might not be able to last in a series with the likes of the Lakers or, the Raptors or the Celtics or even the Miami Heat. So we'll have to see. A lot of great things going on in the NBA. We'll keep you guys updated as that progresses. But before we get into our next segment, do you enjoy having lively discussions about sports while indulging in Kimball's chicken parm? Do your friends ever complain that all you talk about is sports? Most importantly, do you feel that your individual dominance of intramural sports scene warrants media attention? If your answer is yes to any of these questions, WCHC Sports has a place for you. For information on opportunities to broadcast, podcast, and everything in between, email wchcsports@g.holycross.edu today.
so speaking of playoffs, Rob, we just got through a weekend that featured not one, not two, but three game sevens in the NHL Stanley Cup, with the Dallas Stars, Vegas Golden Knights, and New York Islanders emerging victorious to join the Tampa Bay Lightning as teams reaching the conference finals. And not to say that the Vegas and New York games were not exciting in their own regard, but how about Dallas versus Colorado, a 5-4 overtime win in a game seven? To me, it definitely sounds like a hockey fan's dream come true, Rob.
Yeah, it sure was, Aidan. We had a fantastic slate of games all week. And if the Stars' overtime win wasn't dramatic enough, we saw a guy making his playoff debut score a hat trick, including the game-winning goal. Stars defenseman, Yoel Kiviranta received a behind-the-net pass from teammate Andre Sekera and snuck a one-timer past Avs goalie Michael Hutchinson 7 minutes and 24 seconds into the extra period. Like I said before, first playoff game of Kiviranta's career. What a debut for him. He sends Dallas to their first Western Conference Finals since 2008, 12 years since they've been there. And before I hand it off to you, Aidan, let's remember the Stars lost 8 of their first 9 games of the season and lost their starting goaltender Ben Bishop back on August 14th when they were playing the Flames in their first round series, and they were down 2-1 after they lost him. Things looked pretty dire for the Stars, but now they have their backup goaltender, Anton Hudobin. He's been on fire this past series, and including the win against the Avs. The Stars have overcome all sorts of adversity and sit just 3 games away from the Stanley Cup final. They beat the Vegas Golden Knights 1-0 just a few short hours ago, and they're looking like the story of the Stanley Cup playoffs so far. I really did not expect the Stars to do much of anything this postseason. My money was on the Knights or the Avs coming out of the West, and the Stars are making everyone look silly right now.
Yeah, for sure, Rob. It's big time stuff coming out of Dallas. And just going back real quick to that game 7, I'm not quite sure we have, frankly, ever seen anything like this. You mentioned the hat trick, but let's not forget the fact that Kiviranta is an undrafted rookie who scored just 1 goal in 11 regular season games. And also, Rob, he wasn't even supposed to be out on the ice for Dallas. He was actually replacing his teammate, Andrew Cogliano, who was dealing with an undisclosed injury. And I mean, Dallas, despite the early success, they definitely have their work cut out for them and a tough series ahead against the number 1 seed Golden Knights. But if the Stars somehow make a run or a push at the Stanley Cup Finals, suddenly you're talking about making a movie for this kid, Kiviranta, because what a performance for him in Game 7.
It was something he'll never forget for the rest of his life. And it's, moments like these that remind us, how amazing it is to be a sports fan. Some of the, incredible storylines that come out of the NBA, the NHL, the MLB every single day. But there is another player this postseason, also out of the Western Conference, whose performance this past week is also worthy of its own cinematic rendition, dare I say, and that's Canucks goaltender Thatcher Demko. He entered in relief for the injured Jacob Markstrom, the starting goalie for the Vancouver Canucks, with his team down 3-1 to the Golden Knights. And all Demko did throughout his time in that series was dominate. He recorded 123 saves on 125 shots, including a shutout in Game 6 over the final 3 games of that series. There was a stretch where Demko didn't give up a goal from, get this, 5 minutes ago in the second period of Game 5 to 6 minutes remaining in Game 7, which tallies to almost 140 straight minutes over 2 games worth of scoreless hockey. But it still wasn't enough to get Vancouver to the finish line, as they unfortunately fell to Vegas, who outshot them by 73 shots in games 5, 6, and 7, which is a remarkable number. And it certainly wasn't the desired result for the Canucks, but we cannot ignore what was a legendary performance from Thatcher Demko. I wouldn't be surprised if he sheds his backup role next season after this performance, whether that be with the Canucks or a completely new team. You see all the time players who thrive in postseasons get a chance of their own as a starter. The most notable example for me is Nick Foles in his time with the Eagles, winning a Super Bowl and another playoff game the next year and getting a huge contract with the Jaguars this past offseason, 2019. Now he's with the Chicago Bears, getting another chance. So if anything's true in this world, Aidan, big-time postseason performances will pay off for your athletic and financial future, to put it that way.
That's true, Rob. It definitely does your wallet wonders. And legendary is right insofar as Demko's performance. And unless the team does look to trade him, it does look like Demko is under contract with Vancouver for 1 more season. But still, as you mentioned, there's certainly a pattern across all sports for GMs to sometimes overreact to stellar playoff performances when it comes to the money they're willing to throw at a particular free agent or what players they're willing to part with in a trade for such a player. But again, obviously there's so much to be said for Demko's heroics, and I personally would not be shocked if this is only the beginning for him, as he is still only 24 years old. Whether you're out with your friends or pounding out a grueling leg day at the gym, WCHC Sports would like to remind you to please wear a mask whenever out in public or around those with whom you do not live. Together, we can reduce the spread of COVID-19 and hopefully catch a dub during the year that is 2020.
That's right, Aidan. We could certainly use plenty of dubs in 2020. But for our weekly discussion of Major League Baseball, I'd like to revisit two teams in particular that we pinned as the outright World Series favorites back in our very first episode. One of them, the Los Angeles Dodgers, have certainly lived up to our expectations with just about a third of the season remaining. They sport a 30-11 record at the time of this recording, the best in the National League by 5.5 games, and the best in all of baseball by 2 games, shortly ahead of the American League East leading Tampa Bay Rays. The usual suspects have always been there for the Dodgers, as Mookie Betts leads baseball and wins above replacement. But it's been a group effort for the 2020 Los Angeles team, as both their batting and pitching ranks among the major's top teams. At the plate, they lead baseball in home runs. They hit an all-time National League record of 57 home runs in the month of August, which is absurd. And they rank second in the league in runs scored per game. Meanwhile, on the mound, the Dodgers are number 1 in ERA, WHIP, and they're number 2 in runs allowed per game. So all of this has led them to go 19-4 overall and 11-2 within their division since August 11th, which at that point they started 11-7, which for the Dodgers was a little pedestrian and concerning for some of their fans. But now there's no doubt that LA is trending up and really shown no signs of slowing down.
Yeah, Rob, just in preparation for today's podcast, I was actually doing some reading earlier on the Dodgers' sudden surge. And right now, in my mind, we are seeing a Derrick Rose-like resurgence from pitcher Clayton Kershaw. Obviously, the former National League MVP's best days are behind him, as he has dealt with an assortment of injuries over the past few years, but the numbers do not lie. Kershaw is enjoying a renaissance year in many ways, and though the sample is quite small by comparison, he's on track to post a career best ERA, and his fastball is really packing as much speed as it has in 3 years, dating back to 2017, currently at about 91.5 miles per hour. And obviously, so many of the headlines from this shortened MLB season are accompanied by the question, is it sustainable? But nevertheless, you do have to applaud a guy like Kershaw, who, again, has put various injuries behind him and is now surrounded with a talented Dodgers roster that has really put the league on notice.
Yeah, I think that was an apt Derrick Rose comparison with Kershaw. And I think one team that really could have used his efforts the past few weeks, the second of our 2 preseason championship contenders, is the New York Yankees. They started an MLB best 16-6 through August 17th and looked primed for a deep postseason run. You had guys like Aaron Judge and Gleyber Torres who were hitting the cover off the ball. You had DJ LeMahieu in the lineup getting on base. And on the mound, you had Garrett Cole, still with Derrick Rose on the mind. He was pitching like he was worth every penny of his 9-year, $324 million deal he signed this offseason. Yet here we are, September 7th now, at the time of the recording, and the Yankees are currently 3rd in the AL East at 21-19. They're even behind the Toronto Blue Jays, a team many people thought would finish close to dead last in that division. Torres, Judge, Giancarlo Stanton, and Gio Urshela have all been battling injuries, and Cole has lost his last 3 starts and surrendered 11 earned runs in the process. Aidan, we're 2/3 of the way through the regular season already, and the Bronx Bombers are just 2 games over 500. And while they've been plagued by injury, fans and players alike are justified and, for the most part, agree that this has been an unacceptable stretch for the Yankees, and anything short of an ALCS or World Series appearance may put manager Aaron Boone on the hot seat. But for now, though, I feel like New York has to focus on just making the postseason, let alone a deep run that ends in a championship.
They are struggling, Rob. That much is clear. And I probably shouldn't even tell this story, but a few weeks ago, back when the Yankees were actually surging and their rival, the Boston Red Sox, were really in quite a slump as they have not yet shaken off. I'm at Marshall's, right? And my buddy John, shout out to John, he's a diehard Red Sox guy. And so, you know me, I don't follow much baseball, but just to mess with him and spite him, I bought this New York Yankees shirt, right? Thinking I could just wear it, poke fun at his team, nothing too malicious. But here I am. It's lost all of its comedic value based on the fact that Yankees, they can't catch a win themselves. So I don't know. I might just burn it. I might save it for next year. I'm not going to burn it. I would donate it if anything. But yeah, really, that backfired on me quite poorly. So I'm sorry, John. It's all love. Didn't mean to do you like that. And well, frankly, I didn't.
Yeah, Aidan, and they say baseball is a game of superstition. And who knows, the shirt could be the downfall of the New York Yankees in 2020. That is yet to be seen. But we only have 20 games left, so we'll be finding out very soon.
So now Rob and I will move on to our last segment, our assists, fumbles, and what to watch for this week in sports. So my assist of the week has to go to the New Orleans Pelicans, New Orleans Saints, alongside the NFL Foundation. With all that's going on in the world right now, there has been relatively little news coverage of Hurricane Laura, which battered the Louisiana coastline for over a week and was the strongest hurricane to hit the state since 1856. And the Pelicans, Saints, and NFL have since announced a $500,000 donation to provide relief to victims, and each organization will be involved in fundraising efforts for nonprofits Feeding Louisiana, Community Foundation of Southwest Louisiana, and American Red Cross of Louisiana in the coming weeks. So, Rob, our hearts are certainly with the victims of this disaster, and obviously I commend these organizations for their response.
Absolutely. Prayers to everyone affected by the natural disasters occurring last week. But moving on, my assist for this week was the Pittsburgh Pirates formally announcing that this Wednesday, September 9th, as Roberto Clemente Day, honoring the late Pirates legend. And to give you a little backstory and some baseball history here, Aidan, Clemente, an MVP, 2-time World Series champion, 12-time Gold Glover, and 15-time All-Star, was perhaps best known for his humanitarian efforts and devotion to his home of Puerto Rico off the field. He returned every offseason to provide food, water, clothing, and run clinics for young ball players in the area he grew up. So when you hear of stories of athletes going back to their roots, Clemente is, right there with them. Unfortunately, he tragically died in a plane crash on New Year's Eve in 1972, bringing relief packages to those affected by an earthquake in Nicaragua. His legacy is honored through the Roberto Clemente Award, an annual recognition of a major league player who, quote, best represents the game of baseball through extraordinary character, community involvement, philanthropy, and positive contributions on and off the field. So the Pirates are going to wear number 21, Clemente's number, on Wednesday, and I felt like it was right to recognize not only one of the game's greatest all-time players in baseball, but a man who is perhaps the greatest example of what it means to be a role model in American sports.
Definitely, Rob. Clemente's impact, obviously, he was sort of a pioneer in terms of community involvement and philanthropy among athletes, and the impact of his work is understandably still felt today. So moving on, my fumble of the week goes to one of my favorite guys in the NBA, and that is Tacko Fall of the Boston Celtics, to whom Rob alluded earlier in this podcast. Tacko didn't do anything wrong, but wait until you hear this one, Rob. Brad Stevens checked the 7-5 Tacko Fall into Game 3 against Toronto, actually to defend Kyle Lowry's miraculous inbounds pass with Again, half a second left on the clock. And Tacko did his job, but Lowry just made a heck of a pass, resulting in Anunoby's game-winning 3 as time expired. And Tacko, as a result, finished the game a -3 in the plus-minus stat in only half a second on the floor. And so that translates to, get this, minus 17,280 points per 48 minutes. And I cannot confirm that this is a record, but if it is, talk about being on the wrong side of history. But still love you, Tacko. You did your job. It's nothing personal.
Yeah, I think we all love Tacko, and I don't think there's any need to worry. Aidan, his time, in the sun, his moment will come, and he'll quickly forget that game 3. And my fumble this week comes from the world of tennis. Yes, you heard it. The WCHC Sports Podcast talking about tennis, as the world's #1 player, Novak Djokovic, was defaulted, or in normal terms, disqualified from the US Open for hitting a woman in the face with a ball. Djokovic, after losing a point to opponent Pablo Carrena Busta, showed his frustration by smacking a ball to the side into what he hoped would be a wall, but instead was the nose of a line judge. And to Djokovic's credit, he recognized his action right away. He immediately came to the aid of the judge and looked visibly, shaken, apologetic, which has led some to question if his disqualification was justified. But regardless, the world's top tennis player is out of the US Open and may think twice before letting his temper get the best of him next time around.
Rob, I certainly do appreciate the nod to tennis. Not many know this about me, but I actually was a varsity tennis player back in high school for one season, in addition to basketball. So definitely worth bringing up. But more importantly, my own personal stories aside, really this was Djokovic's chance, right? Because you talk about the all-time Grand Slam list. Ahead of Djokovic is Roger Federer at 20, Rafael Nadal at 19, and then Novak slotting in at 17. But neither of Federer nor Nadal were actually in this tournament. So in terms of moving up on that all-time leaderboard, this was really his golden opportunity, so to speak. And obviously his actions were quite regrettable. I also watched the video. I'm torn as to whether or not it was justified. It's unfortunate. That's all I'm going to say about it. But definitely in terms of his legacy as a tennis player and his record in these slams, it's definitely something that's going to leave a major mark on his career. So lastly, my what to watch for this week. And as much as I would love to give other sports, such as tennis, credit where credit is due, I've got to stick with Celtics Raptors for this segment also. Again, the Celtics were just half a second away from holding a seemingly insurmountable 3-0 lead over the defending champs, and it slipped away just like that. And as we talked about earlier, the Raptors now have a lot of momentum in a 2-2 series. And Rob, you were diligent earlier in mentioning that they were down 0-2 last year against the Bucks in last year's Eastern Conference Finals before rattling off 4 straight wins. And definitely as a Celtics fan, I have reason to be afraid, and I'm really hoping more than anything, again, from a completely unbiased perspective, that the Celtics can pull through. But truly, I have no idea what to expect over the next few games. And as impressive as Miami has been against Milwaukee, the door is certainly open for the winner of Toronto-Boston to make the NBA Finals. So each team is really playing for quite an opportunity here in this series.
Yeah, and I'm shocked that you picked the Celtics Raptors series as what you were going to watch for this week. But all jokes aside, I think you're completely right in that sense. I think this series, like you mentioned, the winner will likely go on to face the Miami Heat, and subsequently will be favored in that series to advance to the NBA Finals. So there's a lot riding on this Toronto-Boston contest. But meanwhile, Aidan, while we are quickly approaching the excitement of the NBA and Stanley Cup finals, you know my favorite sport to watch is football, which brings me to my game to watch for this week. The defending Super Bowl champions Kansas City Chiefs will open the 2020 season hosting the Houston Texans, a team that, if you forget, not so long ago, blew a 24-point lead to the Chiefs in last year's divisional round. The Chiefs scored 51 straight points en route to a 51-31 victory and ultimately a Super Bowl title. So we'll get to see Patrick Mahomes and Deshaun Watson duke it out in the first professional football game since early February, a time in which our world looked a lot different than it does today. But one thing in particular I'm interested in that's sort of off the field about this game is the National Football League kicking off and slowly reintroducing fans into stadiums, as the Chiefs plan to let about 16,000 socially distanced fans into Arrowhead Stadium for this game. And if this strategy proves sustainable, and let's all hope it does, it could be an enormous step forward in returning sports to their normal state and let passionate followers like you and I finally enjoy games as they were meant to be played.
I think games the way they were meant to be played is the perfect way to phrase that. And I have never attended an NFL game, but that said, Buffalo is just a short 1 hour drive away. And here's hoping that I can experience some semblance of socially distanced Bills Mafia in 2021, if not sooner. So that's going to wrap things up for episode 6 of the WCHC Sports Podcast. We hope that you've enjoyed listening to us talk about sports as much as we have enjoyed talking about them. Be sure to catch me and Rob at the same time next week for episode 7 of the podcast. Until then, farewell.